or pastrami. When he had a crowd over, he would pretend to let them choose the film and then show whatever he had decided on ahead of time. I was a full professor without a PhD, but he was a professor without even a bachelor's degree. I had to admire that. He was my go-to person whenever I had computer problems, which was frequently. When I plugged in a new computer, I blew a fuse and the lights went out. From then on, he called me the Black Thumb. He loved to shop for gadgets online. He bought such useless items as a grill scrubber and a coin sorter, which I suggested he could make into a lamp since he never used it. His answer to most problems was Velcro, so he kept a big supply handy. He had 30 film projectors stored in his building basement in case the one he was using broke down. He considered himself a contrarian and loved to disagree with critics. He especially hated films that claimed to be based on true stories. The last film he attacked was Saving Mr. Banks, which claimed to be true and wasn't. We spoke to each other every afternoon, sharing news and secrets and complaints. Since we both stayed home much of the time, we sometimes ran out of conversation. But we stayed on the phone, waiting through silences, because it wasn't the content that was important, it was the connection. Sometimes we met in Madison Square Park and laughed at the passing parade. Laughter was the main part of our relationship. Whatever I said, he tried to turn into a pun, until I challenged him for not listening to what I was saying, but how it sounded. He agreed and went right on punning. I loved Gene dearly, and I miss him sorely. There will never be anyone like him.
Hi, I'm Brandon Judell. I feel I should be wearing widow's weeds today because after Gene entered my life 40 years ago, and like Arnie, after often talking to him every day, sometimes twice a day, for weeks on end, except when we were feuding, I feel like I've lost a spouse. It's as if I were setting a dinner table for two, only to realize from now on, only one serving of matzo ball soup will be needed. Of course, to be blunt, loving Gene was loving a persnickety, highly opinionated, wise, brave, caring, infuriating, cantankerous, loyal, beloved, inspiring, proud, politically attuned, generous, scintillating, and unparalleled man who is incomparable to all other men. In the early days of our friendship, we were introduced through his best friend, the late Frank O'Dowd. I felt mesmerized every time I entered Gene's screening room. I felt like I was entering cafe society or being accepted as a member of the Algonquin Round Table where Gene was the ruling wit. He sat on his throne, which was later to become one of those electronic lounge chairs that rose to standing position. I recall sitting in the seat slightly lower than Gene's that once housed the butts of Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., James Kirkwood, and Tommy Tune. And one night, I sat next to Carol Lindley shortly after her bout on Twin Peaks Season 2, a season better forgotten. And when there weren't real celebrities around on one of the weekly movie nights, there would be writers, gay activists, comics, Vito Russo, an editor of Tiger Beat, lesbian couples with their child at hand, film critics, octogenarians, fabled Broadway producers, Israeli immigrants, the certifiably insane, former hustlers, men in their last stages of AIDS, heterosexuals suffering from hemorrhoids, and film students by the dozens. Yes, there were nights when that little space he called a living room would embrace 30 bodies, many on the floor, knee to knee, watching superstars of the 1930s romp about in films projected in 16 millimeter onto a screen lowered from the ceiling. Gene would say, "This is how movies should be made, should be seen." Many of us here today were transformed by Gene and his unequaled love of celluloid. Such was my godson Jordan, who became part of Gene's life with his siblings Jonathan and Gabrielle. When he was small enough, Gene would give him rides on his electric scooter during Waterside's 4th of July celebrations. He and his siblings still recall when Gene introduced them to Watership Down, Return to Oz, and the 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T. Well, Jordan asked me a few weeks ago whether Gene was a genius. At the time, I didn't know what to answer. And since then, I have pondered that question. How does one define genius? Well, Gene was exceptionally clever. He had an encyclopedic command of Hollywood cinema from the silent era to the 1980s and then some. In fact, he was a walking, talking IMDb before the internet was ever invented. Also, Gene was able to hold forth for hours on how horrendous Tarantino's Pulp Fiction was for the art of filmmaking without ever having viewed it. He also inspired multitudes of students, including Bryan Singer. He knew everyone or knew everyone who knew everyone else. There really was not a topic he could not hold forth on. He was an analyst to his friends, a wit equal to Oscar Levant and Dorothy Parker. He compiled a list of English words that sounded Yiddish. He adored youth who could appreciate black and white films, such as 14-year-old Evan, who I believe is here today. The possibility that his great love for cinema would continue on was his greatest pleasure. He was a grand teacher who in fact transformed all of whom he touched. So yes, Jordan, I believe Gene was a genius of sorts, but most of all, he was a man who was easy to love. Moving on, Gene, who adamantly argued over the years that there was no such thing as gay culture, in fact helped bring gay culture to cable TV. Yes, back in 1977, with Stephen B. and the great Frank O'Dowd, he produced the groundbreaking Emerald City, billed as the world's first television show for gay men and women. Emerald City is now considered an important historical document by anyone writing or filming about that era. Next shot. Okay. Well, you're supposed to be seeing, this is from the New York Times. This was the first time the New York Times reviewed a cable show, and as I said, it was a gay cable show that Gene created. And it really broke ground. And here's a rare on-air moment of Gene interviewing an important figurehead of the Stonewall riots.
Tonight in Emerald City, Eddie Skull Murphy, a gay double agent, discusses his life and times in the underworld. Also this evening from Germany, Kraftwerk singing their haunting rendition of The Robots. We are the robots.
I'm Eugene Stavis from the Emerald City, and today our special guest is Ed Murphy, who is officially chairman and founder of the Christopher Street Festival, which goes on every year during the Gay Pride Day. And he's come to the news recently because of an article that appeared in the Village Voice by Arthur Bell detailing some of his adventures in the underworld, the netherworld of the gay scene in New York. Ed's life, as a matter of fact, is sort of like a combination of the Untouchables and the Jerry Lewis Telethon, and we're delighted to have him here, and we want to talk with him and ask him some questions about his extraordinary life and what he does now. Hi, Ed. Glad you could make it. Ed, maybe the most controversial thing about you, and the thing that really caught the headlines in the thing was you're working undercover for a long time for the State Select Committee on Crime,
Right.
Particularly in the area of New York bars and mob-controlled bars and various things. Can you tell us something about how you got into that and how you decided to do that?
Well, I was working for the federal government as a undercover informer. I started at the time that the extortion ring was working in New York City. We had a big extortion ring, and I took a fall with the ring. I took a fall with the ring, but it was a planned job to infiltrate the other four groups that was working in the different states.
Yeah.
And I got into the mob. I went out with them on jobs. But every move I made, the FBI was informed, and there was agents on the scene and stuff like that.
Did the FBI come to you and ask you to do it?
Yes.
They did?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And what they told me what the story is, because, and also a very, very close friend was involved in this of mine. And I got on his ass for being involved in it because he is gay. I said, why do you want to hurt gay people?
Why was he? I mean, why would someone do that?
He was money in it.
It was in money. And did you decide to become an informer because you didn't like the idea of gay people exploiting other gay people?
Well, there was one thing, but the people that were hurting this, there was one person commit suicide, another one lost his family, and there was so much hurt and so much misery connected. When they told me the whole stories, I said, okay, I'll work for you.
Yeah.
And
when was this? This was in the 60s, wasn't it?
yes, in 64, 65, and 66. So I said to the other guy, it's kind of hot in here, I'm going outside for air. See, when I went outside, I tried to get into the guy's trunk where I knew where the plates were, but I had nothing, what am I going to do, shoot it off? So what I did is I let the air out of the guy's tire. So I went back in and sat down, and when me and the guy left, his tire was flat. So he had to open the trunk.
Yeah, that's what.
Right? So I says, all right, open the trunk. I says, and here's the thing, you start taking, I'll get your jack on, right? And I pulled the hood of the trunk right on his head and shot right out with the plates.
It's fantastic. That's the Untouchables part. Excuse me, Ed, we have to take a brief intermission here. We'll be back with Ed Murphy in just a moment.
Hello, my name is Jim Saslow. I knew Gene for decades, it seems. We met through the early gay cultural community, which you've just seen a piece of here, which in the 1970s and 80s was still so small that it was possible for everybody in that community to know everybody else, and impossible not to know anybody who was also willing to be involved in these kinds of quasi-underground but very important activities. The fact that it seems like so many of us who've spoken so far have similar memories shows us how consistent Gene was about his own identity. But it also means that there's a lot of repetition that could happen. So I'm going to keep this briefer than I had thought. My later connections with Gene usually started with a phone call from Brandon Judell. We're having a Gene night. And off we go to that insanely big crowded apartment that you've just seen in the film with its cascading shelves of film reels and Manhattan's only built-in projection booth. And you never knew who you might meet at these impromptu assemblies. Students, assistants, screenwriters, film critics, from the fledgling to the famous. All of us eagerly anticipated another forgotten treasure or familiar chestnut from his encyclopedic collection, which pre-iPad, we would select from a dog-eared printout of all of his titles. I say we, but as Arnie pointed out in his film, much of the time, he did the deciding. But we didn't care because whatever we finally watched, it would be worthwhile for just the reasons he said it was. And of course, he would share his endless fund of historical and stylistic info about it, plus the relevant Hollywood dish on everybody in it, with the enthusiastic zeal of a missionary. There was one time, just this past summer, when a mild protest was issued after Gene showed some fading 40s classic, even though Brandon had been repeatedly pitching a new film that he brought along that he said we would really all enjoy. And the next day, Brandon emailed all of that evening's attendees, listing a collection of rave reviews for the new feature that Gene had sidelined, at the end of which he asked rhetorically, now how could that possibly stand up against B-movies with Edward G. Robinson and Debbie Reynolds? Gene commented in return with his typical wryness, well, that's a new high watermark for snarkiness. A pity you have to validate yourself through other people's opinions, particularly since you're a critic yourself, unquote. Now, of course, it was basically all in fun, and we know it's notoriously hard to judge tone of voice in emails, but somehow we all felt unexpectedly a little queasy about the exchange. The Gene nights went on, as jovial as ever, but in retrospect, something had begun to change in him by that time. I think it was hard for some of us to glimpse the increasing sadness behind his customary good cheer. And when I learned the full magnitude of his mounting problems after his death, it was too late to help. We all struggle with our own particular demons. His included a lifelong professional passion that never made him any money, and a personal problem with his metabolism that resisted all of his attempts to overcome it, increasingly limiting his mobility. In the film that opens today's program, he was very upbeat about those issues, but that was already filmed a while ago. I think more recently, he just got tired of the struggles. The phrase, rest in peace, always struck me as trite, but now I see clearly how elusive peace can be, and I hope he's found some.
My name is Jesse. Gene, for the past 2 years you were my mentor and a good friend. When we last met, you challenged me and called me out on what you called a dangerous aspect of my personality. You reminded me that emotions are more powerful than anything you can try to intellectualize. Although never formally enrolled in your classes, you were indeed the best teacher I've ever had. And the lessons learned were not by any means confined to cinema or art. You taught us all much about life. On that same day, in our last meeting, you screened Ordinary People for me. You were the perfect film presenter. You knew how to introduce and display any movie you thought necessary. And even if it wasn't one's immediate taste, you were able to get any of us to see the glory in it. You know, if you were someone who said you didn't like musicals, Gene would ask a few questions and immediately screen a musical for you. And by his introduction, he'd make you fall in love with at least one aspect of what the filmmaker probably had in mind. And one thing I used to do, which he probably thought was kind of silly, was I bring these pieces of paper with me, and they had questions written on them. And most of my questions usually revolved around movies, but in some cases they were aimed towards his personal experience. And even though I can sense it wasn't his favorite thing to do with me, I did it because Gene was truly this big, glowing ball of knowledge and a definite artistic taste who was expanding my opinions like so rapidly. So, a great perspective that you distilled in me, Gene, was how cinema is a culmination of all the arts and how since caveman paintings, man has had this desire to capture and communicate through emotion, and this effect satisfies a visceral urge in us. And your taste in food was also very unique. He always had lemonade or brisk with seltzer water, and we often ordered Tina's Cuban food, which I loved. And one time while I was pouring myself a drink, you asked me to bring the Cheetos and sour cream for dip. And I have to say, I never saw that coming. I never seen that before. But. And this winter break, he loaned me a work on Hitchcock, a work which, most unfortunately, I'll never get to return. Your place, if anything, was a veritable temple dedicated to the art that you so loved. My meetings with you at Waterside were the highlight of my every week. I always left knowing that I had grown and expanded my mind a little more. Good conversation is in response to the collective suffering, a joyful force of compassion. There's a quote that reminds me of my all too short life with Eugene. It is difficult and even painful to imagine all the knowledge, anecdotes, and life lessons that I may never learn without you. You will live on, Gene, in spirit, wherever people understand and enjoy the true power that cinema is. I love you and I miss you, Gene. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you gave me in such a short time. May you be led into paradise where you'll be able to become art yourself and screen movies forever. Thank you, Jeff.
Hi, my name is Ray Ellen. I had the incredible, great fortune of meeting Gene about 15 years ago through my friend Brandon Judell. Brandon invited me to a Gene night, and it was really one of the most incredible, unique experiences of my life. The first time I remember, we watched a Jack Benny episode. We saw the Edward G. Robinson film Seawolf. And I remember by the end of the night, I was hooked on Benny and Robinson and Stavis. I couldn't get enough. The film in the beginning, I wish it went on for hours. I could have just listened to Gene talk endlessly. I actually, like Susan, I called his answering machine after I heard the news. I always got a kick out of how we would always say, this is 1045. When you called this house. And I would tease him about that because I said, what is that? And he would say, oh, who has time for the first three numbers? Gene was really, when you went to his apartment, as we've seen, not only was it just an incredible and special atmosphere, but Gene was the consummate host. He made everybody feel welcome. My friends were immediately treated as his. Didn't matter your background or your occupation or your age. You can see there's a huge range of people that he touched. But his kindness and his generosity and his wit were always spread evenly around the room. The last time I saw Gene, it was at his apartment about 2 weeks before he moved on. And I remember we did something, we always watch an older film, something from the 40s or 50s. We watched the film, we watched a contemporary movie, we watched Nebraska, and which was a lot of fun, but it just sort of symbolized a change of some sort, that we were watching a film that had just come out. And Gene told a lot of stories, even more than usual, and it was terrific. He talked about how when years ago he went to LA, and he was out at a cocktail party, and Groucho Marx was there. And Groucho said to a group of people, hey, you should all come over for lunch tomorrow to my house. And then Groucho turned to his friend, and he pointed at Gene and said, make sure you bring the funny one. Which Gene was, over the moon. He told me about, there was a guy who apparently was involved with Maureen Sullivan, Maureen Stapleton, Maureen O'Hara. And when Gene heard that, he immediately said, oh, it's the pride of the Maureen's. Really had just an amazing sense of humor. He laughed when he said to me, he goes, look, this is my new favorite outfit. And he had an I Beat Anorexia t-shirt. there really there's no one. I can't imagine ever meeting anybody like Gene again. Just a truly remarkable, one of a kind person. Brandon, you really summed him up perfectly. You know, I made a little film several years ago, and I remember Gene offered his help. I never asked for anything. He was just so incredibly generous, and he would set up screenings of sections of the film with his students so I could get some feedback. And I remember being very frustrated at one point. And Gene said to me, he always knew how to sum things up, and he said, "Don't worry, it's not the last thing you'll do." And he would tell that to his students all the time. "Don't worry, it's not the last thing that you'll do." And he was right. You know, in the film that we saw, Gene said about Henri, he said that he died suddenly and the heart and soul had gone out of it. He said that in the beginning of the film. And, you know, I feel the same way about Gene. You know, we can love and enjoy films, but there'll never be another Gene night, and there'll never be another Gene Stavis. So we're all so blessed and fortunate to have known him. Thanks.
Thanks everyone for coming. We're just going to open the microphone up for anybody who'd like to come up and just say a few words for Gene. So anybody would like to come up? Tom Bob, maybe. Big Ange, Tom Bob. Yeah. Anybody? Sal Petrosino, Assistant Chair of the Film Department at SVA.
Hi, I've known Gene for over 25 years, and certainly he was a man larger than life in so many different ways. Everyone who knew Gene couldn't help but be moved by Gene. He would always explain to me how powerful cinema was and how it could move and affect people, and he taught me a lot about that. But I also felt that way about Gene. He moved and affected people in profound ways. Everyone who knew Gene knew how funny he could be. One time we had invited Gene to speak at Rimini, Italy, a film festival that we started there. We were showing the Dreyer film, and he was going to speak in front of about 3,000 people. And he had left a day earlier than me, and I was really concerned about him being safe and him being in a good place. And when I arrived there, I saw the scooter come whizzing by, and he was like a little boy. It was amazing how happy he was. And he was like, "Hey, what the hell took you so long?" You know? And I was like, "Wow, you know, it was, you know, life is about the moments." I say this sometimes to my students, and having an opportunity to be with Gene, some of the great moments in my life, some very personal moments. We would have profound discussions and disagreements, and then we would have silly discussions, and we would always wind up laughing and learning. In Rimini, one of the big events that made him very happy was he came over to me and said, "Guess what? Guess what? A bishop blessed me." Well, you know, Gene wasn't the most religious man in the world. And I said, "Yeah, Gene," I said, I heard about this. I said, "Because I heard you screaming, 'It burns, it burns.'" And he was hysterical laughing. Then coming back home, because of his size, we were in first class. That was the first time I ever flew in first class. It was only because of Gene that they said, "Okay, you can come with him too." And they treated him like Paul Newman there, and he loved it. He just had the meeting out of his hands. And Gene says, "You know, we're on the flight." He says, "Enjoy, look around, and they have great food." And I said, "Well, at least I'll have someone to speak with." And, the 9-hour flight, Gene slept for like 7.5 hours. So I just said, one thing I have to say, one of the things that it's a silly thing, but every time we'd have different discussions, he would always want me to say this too. I would have the